to Humanities on the Road. Today we're at the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg for Thaddeus Stevens, The Politics of Freedom with Steve Anderson. And I'm Tracy Matisak. You know, Humanities on the Road is a collaboration. It's a joint project between the Pennsylvania Humanities Council and the Pennsylvania Cable Network. And the goal is to bring together people from all across Pennsylvania to talk about history and art and the important ideas that shape our world. We want to extend special thanks to our host today, the National Civil War Museum. You know, this museum opened in 2001, and it is the largest museum to tell both sides of the story without bias to either side through the use of multimedia. Here you can follow the human drama through character videos, and you can even hear Civil War tunes at music stations. You actually experience the bloody conflict as it unfolded, beginning with the causes of the war and ending with the assassination of President Lincoln and the role of veterans in remembering the war. The second gallery is devoted to slavery, as seen through the eyes of 19th century Americans, and you can actually watch a slave auction unfold before your eyes. Meet Mr. Lincoln is the museum's first permanent addition to the gallery since it opened, and with touchscreen technology, you can ask questions of the great emancipator, and you can also view Lincoln through the perspectives of those close to him, like Mary Todd Lincoln and General Grant, Frederick Douglass, and even John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's assassin. The museum also hosts a wide range of other programs, including a dinner lecture series, a community free days to enjoy free museum admission, and living history encampments and educational presentations all throughout the summer. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Steve Anderson is a Commonwealth speaker with the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. He is a professional actor, storyteller, and living history interpreter based near the Harrisburg area. He performs one-man shows and storytelling programs at schools and theaters and special events all throughout the years with his touring series, GreatTalesLive.com. He also performs with the Pennsylvania Past Players, which is a living history troupe that's connected with Pennsylvania's Civil War trails. Steve joins us today as 19th century attorney turned Congressman Thaddeus Stevens. A leading member of Congress during the Civil War, Thaddeus Stevens is best known as a senior statesman, a radical Republican, and one of the authors of the 13th and 14th Amendments. Well, today, Congressman Stevens will tell us about his earlier years as an attorney in Gettysburg and Lancaster, and as a property owner and a state representative in Harrisburg. And the question is, how did a small-town attorney become a prominent abolitionist? And what did he do to save public education in Pennsylvania? Congressman Stevens will answer our questions about his life, his world, and his perspective on our world. And later, Steve Anderson will step out of character a bit so that we can talk to him about living history performance. So join us to learn more about Thaddeus Stevens in a program called The Politics of Freedom. Please welcome Congressman Stevens.
Abolition? Yes. Our armies dwindle away from miasma and disease while the rebels spring up behind and retake what we had gained. All because the slaves at home are giving them no trouble, because we, at the point of a bayonet, are keeping them loyal to their masters instead of to the Union. I have told these things to the President and to the Cabinet, and they replied, "It may come to this. Come to this. When 200,000 men have melted away and $2 billion spent, come to this. I will not and I cannot stand this. If you elect me, I shall vote that every man be armed, black and white, who can assist in crushing the rebellion." That is what I said at the Republican Convention in Lancaster in 1862. Demanding immediate emancipation, calling for black soldiers, denouncing President Lincoln for not moving quickly enough. But it was not always so. Forgive me. Ladies, gentlemen, fellow visitors from the 19th century, my name is Thaddeus Stevens. I was an attorney in Gettysburg for 25 years, 25 more in Lancaster. state representative here in Harrisburg, a member of Congress during the Civil War. I'm proud to say that I am an abolitionist, but I was not always so. The truth is, I gave very little thought to slavery for the first quarter century of my life. I was born April 4th, 1792, in Danville, Vermont. I grew up on a poor farm, more rocks and stones than crops. Grew up with a twisted foot that never healed. Handicapped, you would say. Crippled, I would say. Useless, my father would say. Well, he left us when I was 12 years old. And after that, my mother insisted that I must have an education. She moved the family to Peacham, Vermont, so that I could attend the Peacham Academy. I studied there, taught there, served there temporarily as the acting principal. Continued my studies at Dartmouth and at Burlington College, today the University of Vermont. And in 1814, I followed some of my classmates here to Pennsylvania in search of work. I taught for 2 more years in York, Pennsylvania. And in 1816, opened my first law office in Gettysburg, right on the square. Ask me later how I became an attorney. It's quite a story in itself. At first, I would take almost any case I could get. But in 1820, an old friend of mine asked me to do him a favor, asked me to sit second chair in a case under this law, the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780. The first time a state legislature had stood up against slavery. Well, technically it was under the amendment of 1788, the law that said that if you were brought here to Pennsylvania as a slave and you remained here for 6 months and 1 day, you were free. Well, a young woman, Charity Butler, was seeking her freedom and the freedom of her children under this law. And my friend was representing the slave owner who wanted her back. As I say, I grew up in Vermont. We had abolished slavery in 1777. As far as I was concerned, slavery was an abstraction, something that happened far away. Sure, that might be the way that some of you think of it in your time, looking so far back into the past. And so I took the case. And I pursued the case all the way to the state Supreme Court. And I am ashamed to say that I won. 50 years as an attorney is the only case I ever regretted winning. When I watched that young woman be led away with her children, something changed inside of me. From that day on, I never represented a slave owner in a case like that ever again. Instead, when fugitives would come to Pennsylvania, come to Gettysburg, ask for my help, I always took their case, whether they could pay me or not. My neighbors remembered years later, looking back, that I never lost one of those cases. I argued all sorts of cases. I argued for women's rights. I argued civil cases and criminal cases. Argued for the defense in the very first murder trial in Gettysburg. Even represented the Cherokee Nation in front of the Supreme Court. But my heart was with those fugitives seeking their freedom. Now, some people will tell you that I went far beyond the courtroom working for those fugitives, that I was involved with the Underground Railroad in Gettysburg and or in Lancaster, that my ironworks out in Chambersburg that I kept running for decades, even though I was losing money hand over fist, were there to be a station on the Underground Railroad for fugitives. It's been a great deal of talk in the last few years about a possible hiding place at my home in Lancaster as well. Now, as a good politician, I can neither confirm nor deny any of those stories, you understand? But I can confirm that I worked tirelessly for those fugitives. I can confirm that I began to consider myself an abolitionist. Now, it is easy to call yourself whatever you like. Easy to donate your time and your services to a cause you believe in. The challenge comes when you are called to risk something, to give up something valuable to you for what you believe. Well, I went down once to Baltimore to buy some books for my law library. Miss Tracy was speaking of the exhibit upstairs about a slave auction. Well, I encountered a slave auction in Baltimore. If you have not seen the exhibit she was referring to, I urge you to. Go and take a look when we are done here. And tell me whether you see the same thing I do. That out of all of the figures, in all of the exhibits in this entire museum, no one is more straight, more erect, more proud, more self-possessed than the young man about to go up on the block. Well, I saw pride in the eyes of the man going up on the block in Baltimore as well. And I saw a resemblance between him and the gentleman conducting the auction. Turned out he was deeply in debt, about to sell his own son into slavery to pay his debts. Well, I bought that young man's freedom. I came back to Gettysburg without my books. It was in 1833 that I finally had something more valuable to risk. See, in 1833, I was elected to the state legislature for the first time, member of the State House of Representatives. 2 years later, I lost my seat. Now, some historians will tell you that I took my voters for granted. Others will tell you that, well, that I failed to get out the vote. But the way I remember it, I was not a failure at all. The way I remember it, there was something more important to me than my campaign, the campaign of another man, Joseph Ritner. And I did win that fall, because I helped to get Joseph Ritner elected as governor of the Commonwealth, the first governor of any state in America willing to publicly denounce slavery. Well, having lost my seat, I was available in 1837 to serve at a convention here in Harrisburg to put together a new state constitution. You see, the Constitution from 1790 had some ambiguities, particularly about voting rights. It said that in order to vote in Pennsylvania, you must be a freeman. It did not define the term. So was a free black man a freeman? Could he vote? That was up to the courts. So in some districts, the answer was yes, he could. In some districts, the answer was no, he could not. And so I went to that convention in 1837 with high hopes of adding new language to the state constitution to guarantee the right to vote to every free man, black or white. I failed. I went with high hopes to add language requiring a trial by jury before anyone could be deprived of life or liberty, with a particular eye to those fugitives who came to Pennsylvania. And again, I failed. Instead, my fellow delegates added language of their own. One word. In order to vote in Pennsylvania, you must be white. I refused to sign that document. And I am ashamed to say that it did just barely, by 0.5% of the votes cast, it did pass. Well, I also made some enemies at that convention, standing up for what I believed. And those enemies came back to bite me the next year in the election of 1838, the dirtiest election I ever saw. It was voter fraud and bribery and character assassination and race baiting on all sides. Eventually, mob violence here in Harrisburg. I got out of state politics, just barely got out with my life. You can ask me about that later. Well, as far as I was concerned, I was done with politics. I moved from Gettysburg to Lancaster, started over to focus on my law work. It turned out the politics was not done with me. In 1849, I was elected to the United States Congress, just in time to watch helplessly as the Congress passed the Compromise of 1850. California will be added as a free state. And in return, we passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which had said not merely that a bounty hunter could come up into the north chasing after a fugitive, not merely that he could grab anyone he liked without any recourse at all, even if he was grabbing someone who had been free all their lives. It said also that if a bounty hunter came into the north, he could come to you, or to you, or to you, and ask for your help, and you were bound by federal law to help. Well, we knew that that law would be tested sooner or later. The test came 1 year later here in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County. A farmer came up from Maryland, Edward Gorsuch. He went to Christiana, Pennsylvania, chasing after 4 fugitives. He went to the home of Mr. William Parker, a free black man there in Chambersburg, and he demanded his property. Well, words were exchanged. A crowd gathered. Shots were fired on both sides. When it was over, Mr. Gorsuch lay dead, his son Dickinson badly wounded. Dozens of black men were arrested, and 3 white Quakers who had done nothing but to pass